Welcome to the celebration of the 20th anniversary of the Peters Township Library. What is this officially called? The Oral History Project, which was in conjunction with the Heinz History Center. This began back in 2003 with the interview of 21 people, and it was all transcribed and passed out, and it's in the library now if you ever would like to look at it. It's also online. You can actually get on the computer, look at the library website, and see it. When I heard about today's program, I looked back at the interviews, and I really literally couldn't stop rereading them. There were so many amazing stories of people, places, and events in the township that I really hadn't thought about for a lot of years. We all remember things differently, and hearing them from different perspectives really brought back the memories and made it even more fascinating. Today you'll have the opportunity to learn about some of the history of Peters Township as told through the words and different stories of the various people you hear about. I'd also suggest that if today's program sparks your interest in learning more about the history of the township, please visit the history section of the library. This outstanding collection of pictures, books, documents, yearbooks, and programs that have been assembled by Margaret, Deitzer, Carrie, Weaver, and the other members of the staff will be well worth your while. Now, before we begin our program, I'd like to introduce Anthony Luisi, who will be performing for us this afternoon. Anthony will be a senior at Peters Township High School, and he is an Eagle Scout with Troop 1313, a member of Room 100, which is the highly distinguished high school a cappella choir. He also plays a baronet saxophone in the high school marching band, and is a member of the Thespian Troop 185, the wrestling team, and the track and field team. Please join me in welcoming Anthony.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, God shed His grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for pilgrim feet who stirred impassioned stress, a thoroughfare for freedom beat across the wilderness. America, God mend thine every flaw, confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. At this time, we'd like to recognize the members of the Peters Township High School class of '73 who are celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. So the members of the class, if you rise or raise your hand or something, are you all up there? And also, we'd like to recognize any other alumni of Peters Township High School. If you'd like to stand or raise your hand, we'd like to recognize you also. Everybody wants to raise their hand. Okay, thank you. At this time, we continue our program. We'd like to bring back Anthony, who will recognize the high school graduates.
as friends united, here we sing to Peters Township High. Through honor, love, and loyalty, our pride will never die. Memories of the red and white are in our hearts with you. Peters High, our alma mater, ever faithful and always true. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then continue with our program. We'll please welcome our library director, Lacey Love.
Hello. Thank you for everyone for joining us for today's program, celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Peters Township Oral History Project. I'd like to say a special thank you to all of the family members of the interviewees who are in attendance here today. We're excited today to share some fascinating Peters Township history, revisit memories of long-term community members, and talk about the many resources available here in the PTPL archives. The information included in today's presentation is pulled directly from the interviewees' own words. So after the presentation, if you have any questions or you would like to learn more, feel free to take a look at the bound copies of the oral histories available for checkout on the table right at the back there. The audio versions are also available online through our website. The information compiled for this program and for our numerous displays around the library today come from photos and documents that have been donated to the PTPL archives. The more information we have, the more accurate our presentations and displays can be, so we always welcome new donations of original photos or documents related to Peters Township from any time period. And if you think you might have materials of interest, you can contact Margaret. I'd like to thank the Peters Township Library Foundation for generously supporting the archives. The Foundation's mission is to provide fundraising and volunteer support to the library, and one project that they choose to fund is the archives. Supplies, technology, equipment, and the fee for an archival consultant are all covered by the Foundation. If you would like to support the archives financially, you can always visit our website and click the red donate button. And today the Foundation members actually will have a table in the back after the program is done where they'll be selling our history room note cards, Peters Township heritage books, and some other assorted items. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Please make sure you turn off or silence your cell phones ahead of the program if you haven't already. The restrooms are either located here or they're on the second floor right at the top of the stairs in the elevator, and the elevator is located right at the back there. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to our presenters for tonight, Margaret Deitzer, our local history librarian, and Carrie Weaver, our PR and marketing coordinator. They have done a fantastic job of putting together this slideshow, and we're excited to share it with you. So I'll turn it over to them to get us started.
Can you hear me in the back, Tom? Am I too loud? Okay. All right. Thank you, Lacey. Thank you, Anthony. That was just outstanding. And we'll get to hear some more of you, I understand. Thank you. And Carrie, I guess I begin now, right? All right, yeah. Lacey, could advance to the next slide. Excellent. All right, those two maps, Peters Township. First map is from the 1876 publication. It's the Caldwell's Illustrated Combination Atlas of Washington County. We have a reprint, a 1976 reprint of that, and that shows the Peters Township farms in 1876. The photo on the right is from our Township Planning Department, and it shows the location of 3 active farms in Peters Township today. These farms cover approximately 500 acres. The Nevat Farm, 125 acres. The Simmons-Gerhold Farm, 264 acres. And the Trax Farm occupies 111 acres in Peters Township. Again, both of these maps are on display right above us on the second floor. We also have a business directory from this same 1876 publication, and it's pretty much a who's who lived in Peters Township, who were farmers, or who perhaps had other occupations. So after the program, you'll have plenty of time to go upstairs and to look at those exhibits. Prior to 1781, the Peters Township we know today was part of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Before Virginia abandoned claims to Peters Township, frequent conflicts erupted between Pennsylvania and Virginia. On March 28, 1781, Peters Township was the 10th of the 13 original townships formed under an act of the Pennsylvania legislature establishing Washington County. When Peters Township was first formed, the territory was larger and included parts of Allegheny County and parts of Union Township located in Washington County. Throughout the years, boundaries changed in Peters Township until 1834. In 1834, Union Township was formed from Nottingham Township and Peters Township, reducing Peters Township to its present size of 19.5 square miles. In 1800, there were 884 persons living in Peters Township. According to the census information published July 2022, there are now 23,258 persons living in the township. Now I'd like to introduce Carrie Weaver, Public Relations Coordinator at our library. And Carrie will begin with explaining how the Oral History Project we are celebrating came to be. Carrie, next slide.
Thank you, Margaret. Before I talk about the Oral History Project, I'd like to ask that the family members and representatives of the persons that we interviewed in this project, would you please stand or raise your hands so we can recognize you. There's one more person I would like to recognize who was very responsible for this project. It's Mrs. Beerley, who's in the back of the room. Mrs. Lee. In the spring of 2000, the Peters Township Public Library staff, with funding from the Taste of the Township, began an oral history project to record and preserve the history of Peters Township through personal audio interviews with past and present residents. The library contracted with the Senator John Hines History Center's Oral History Service Department with Harry Alfonso to assist with conducting the interviews, which began in August 2003. The faces you see through this presentation are the 21 persons that we were interviewing for this project. Many of them are no longer with us, but their words and voices remain through their recorded interviews. Most of them also share precious photographs which have been added to the Peters Township Public Library archives. The interviews reflect many facets of the history of Peters Township, including farm life, education, government, recreation, transportation, churches, and industry, and at the same time preserve many of the personal experiences of our longtime interviewees. Photographs, documents, records, and letters, and other items donated during the interview process were digitized by library staff and volunteers and incorporated into the finished transcript of the Hines History Center staff and volunteers. The transcripts of the oral histories are available to check out from the display in the back near the refreshment table. They are also part of the library archives at the Senator John Hines History Center and available online through PA photos and documents. Let's remember these individuals who were part of this project. Next slide, please.
A look back. In his words, Robert Chamberlain. That was in 1976, after the celebration. They had opened it up as a competition. I found the Indian arrowhead. I had several of them when I lived up on McClintock Drive, and I dug up a couple of them. And then I wanted to get across the idea that it was rural with the road in the hills, and a little bit of striping on there, more or less to be farmland. And they really put it to use. They got it on everything. Does anyone out there know what the it was that Robert Chamberlain is speaking about? Anyone out there know? Want to tell us? The township logo. Peters Township logo. So Robert Chamberlain was born in 1918. He and his wife Doris moved to Peters Township in 1958. He had already located his business, Chamberlain Sign Advertising, to Peters Township in 1956. Chamberlain served as president, Peters Township Chamber of Commerce, in 1977. He contributed his time and his expertise to the drafting of the Peters Township sign ordinance over the years. If you want to learn more about Chamberlain's creativity with signs, including the Hollywood restaurant sign, neon sign, just listen to him speak and laugh as he describes what sign might not be permitted in Peters Township today. Next slide. Chamberlain's entry, that's on the right, was selected as the winner of the contest for designing a township logo, and it was sponsored by the Peters Township Bicentennial Commission in 1975-1976. Robert Chamberlain also created the logo for the Peters Township Chamber of Commerce. On the left shows Mr. Chamberlain in retirement. In retirement, Mr. Chamberlain took photographs of Peters Township landmarks, and he used these photographs to create oil paintings. He has an oil painting in the Fife Barn, McConaughey's Country Store, Peters Township High School, and Carrie, you have a remark about that high school painting.
Well, they actually used Mr. Chamberlain's painting from the Peters Township High School in 1904 as the cover of the note card that was used during the 100-year anniversary of the high school, which is pretty impressive.
He also painted the McMurray flour mill, and a special one, the last run, which was a trolley painting, and that's on the, that's what I'm going to show. A trolley painting which depicts Pittsburgh Railways, PCC number 1647, on its final journey, the day trolley service was halted in Peters Township, August 29, 1953. And he also did the McDowell Farm, and we do have that painting on display right up above the second floor. Next slide, please.
Let's remember and honor Dave Bushy. In his words, we only ran the mine in the wintertime. That's when you could only sell coal, house coal. The rest of that we put in the garden and did a lot of canning and picked berries and made jelly. Food was pretty tough in the Depression time. Dave Bushy was born in December 1919 in the village of Hackett, which is located between Venetia and Thillendale. His words describe the local mining industry and living in a company town with a company store and company-owned homes. Mr. Cushy describes his childhood during the Great Depression, when his family sold house coal in the winter, grew their own fruits and vegetables to can and preserve so that they had food to eat. They also traded house coal with local farmers for pigs and chicken. Dave Cushy married Violet Trunzo from Houston in 1941 at age 22. They shared 67 years together until Violet's death in March of 2008. Dave passed away a short 9 days later. Mr. Cushy began a lifelong career working in the mines at age 14. After attending high school for 2 weeks, he retired from mining at age 62 in 1981. If you are not familiar with how huge the mining industry was in this area, you'll want to read this transcript or listen to the recording. Mr. Cushy shares his experience as a mine worker, including 3 serious accidents caused by the negligence of others. He briefly mentions the Great Mine Disaster of 1913, which happened before he was born in the Cincinnati coal mine. An underground mine explosion claimed the lives of 97 miners. A placard marking the mule entrance to the mine is located near Finleyville on the Big Gate. The photo on the left is an early photo of the Mathis mine in Finleyville, where Cushy worked. The photo on the right shows Mr. Cushy in his baseball uniform. He enjoyed baseball tremendously through his adult life and earned a tryout with the Pittsburgh Pirates. He managed and coached softball from 1938 to 1950, taking a team to the World's Tournament in St. Louis. Next slide.
Remembering Reed Day. This comment, not necessarily suburban, semi-rural to almost urban society, and that's what we're approaching now. The now was 2003. Reed Day was born September 20th, 1930 in Washington, PA. He and his wife Christine moved to Peters Township in 1958. Reed Day served as a Peters Township School District solicitor for about 40 years, beginning in 1959. In the early 1970s, he served as president of the Pennsylvania State Solicitor Association, which is part of the Pennsylvania School Board Association. In 1961, and I repeat that, 1961, the Pennsylvania legislature introduced the School Consolidation Bill to merge school districts in Pennsylvania. According to Reed Day, the merger plan for Peters Township involved a couple scenarios. First, align Peters Township with the Greenville School District, which was Monongahela, Donora, and Finleyville. Option 2, align Peters Township with the Upper St. Clair School District. At that time, Upper St. Clair was not particularly interested in receiving Peters Township. Reed Day successfully argued that the Peters Township School District remain its own school district. Isn't it amazing what we can all learn from these transcripts? You get to hear their voices if you go into PA Photos and Documents. You can borrow those transcripts, and it's just amazing. I'm sure Carrie will share the same thing with you. Amazing anecdotes about the real history of this township. All right, next slide, please. Slide on the left, the image on the left, is the 1963-1964 Peters Township School Board. That time, and included in the photo, Gaylord Greenlee was the president of the school board. Robert McMurray, Tom's father, was vice president of the school board. And then we have Solicitor Reed Day in the photograph. Others included on the school board, Tom Davies, Riley Yates, Dr. John Moore, William Bly, Gil Brown, Herbert Donbush, and Arch Callender, all part of that school board. In the middle, Reed Day donated to the library a scrapbook of photographs of the mines of science and its impact on the schools in Peters Township. In the middle, we have the mines of science at the McMurray Middle School. The top is an image of damage inside the school, and the bottom is on outside the school. And Reed Day was involved with those court cases involving that mines of science. On the right, how many in this room recall the school prayer controversy of 1995? So we have details about the high school graduation of 1995 and the prayer controversy. This controversy, this prayer controversy, involved potential litigation with the American Civil Liberties Union. The outcome may have been significantly different if the plaintiffs had not demanded to remain anonymous, thus ending the lawsuit before it began. Another controversy. The Brannan Construction Company declared bankruptcy during the construction of the new Peters Township High School. The head of Pittsburgh National Bank sending sheriff deputies to Peters Township to levy Brannan's property at the construction site, Reed Day facilitated a strategy. He arranged for the printing of 1,000 stickers that stated, "Item is the property of the Peters Township School District." He arranged to have these stickers attached to every piece of lumber, wheelbarrow, steel, and everything in sight. When the sheriffs arrived, when the sheriff's deputies arrived, they left without placing a levy on any single item. Next slide.
Next, we remember Robert Donaldson. In his words, "There were no scanners to take fire calls from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. They had taken a wire from the siren to our house across Route 19, and when the calls came in, we took the fire calls." Robert donated extensively to the Peters Township Library archives. In addition to documenting the early history of Donaldson's Crossroads through donated photographs and documents, Robert shared his time and knowledge about the growth of the Crossroads over several decades. Some of you may remember his storyboards that were displayed for several events here at the library. His transcript is full of so many photos he shared with the library that document the history of the township. Robert Donaldson was the son of Walter Donaldson and Rose Pauline Balduzzi Donaldson. Margaret and I shared the history of Donaldson's Crossroads recently in our Route 19 video. It's available on our library YouTube channel for you to watch. Donaldson was a lifelong resident of Peters Township and graduated from the high school in 1949. After serving in the Army during the Korean conflict, he returned home and married Shirley Hickson, and they had 2 sons together. He was an employee at Brookside Lumber and Supply Company in Bethel Park for 53.5 years. He was vice president of the company for 33.5 years. Next slide. His grandfather, Robert Newton Donaldson, purchased about 120 acres in the area that would become Donaldson's Crossroads. The photo on the left shows their family homestead from around 1900. It was demolished in January 2011. It is the current site of the PNC Bank and other commercial establishments. The Donaldson family built the first gas station at the Crossroads in 1912 and later expanded it to include a restaurant and a square dance hall on the 2nd floor. Robert was a charter member of the Peters Township Fire Department, which was organized in 1937, where he served as a volunteer fireman for 38 years, with 15 years as assistant fire chief. The family served over 100 volunteer hours with the Peters Township Fire Department. And the photo on the bottom right shows his mother, Rose Donaldson, receiving a plaque from the Peters Township Fire Department for 30 years of volunteer duty answering calls for the fire department.
Next slide. Richard Frody. So, for me, it's not work. It's a way of life. How we get up each day and what we're going to do and accomplish. This is my home. Richard Frody was born October 27, 1953, and spent his lifetime working on a family farm located on Frody Road, which borders Peterswood Park. He was a 1971 Peters Township High School graduate. Richard donated photographs and other materials to our library archives, documenting the history of Peters Township, particularly during the time his father, Earl Frody, served as the township supervisor and the township roadmaster. Next slide. There you can see the slides, both of them. The one larger one on the right, we don't have a date for it, but obviously it was taken much, much earlier than the photograph of the same road that was taken in 2004. So each time at your park at Frody Road, you can remember you saw that image from the earlier days. Next slide, please. So we have meet the township family. So that's the image on the left. This is the Peters Township official family, including seated from the left. Supervisor Roadmaster Earl Frody, President Harold Kunkel, and Supervisor Willis McCaskey. Standing from the left are Secretary Erwin Sprouse, Justice of the Peace John Richardson, Police Chief George Thomas, and Solicitor Andrew Cummins. Interesting about the police, is just a story I remember here. Richard Frody shared with us that during the 1950s, Peters Township received police calls through Bethel Park, as Peters Township did not have their own police radio. So Bethel Park received the calls, and then they contacted the Peters Township Police. Next slide, please. Oh, can we go back on the slide? Sorry. That photo on the right is the groundbreaking ceremony for the Bell Telephone Company, and they broke ground in 1956. Sorry, Casey, next slide.
Next we remember Mrs. Irma Brega. In her words, we were truck farmers. We used to go to Pittsburgh down to the wharf, and on the north side where we had a stand and sold a couple hundred baskets of tomatoes. Another person who has contributed significantly to preserving the history of Peters Township was Irma Beneshi Brega. She was born in Denora in 1922. Her father dreamed about owning a farm, and so he bought about 90 acres on Just About Road. Next slide. Irma attended Bowerville one-room school. She wrote a personal narrative of a day at the school, which is part of the UTPL archives. She gives many details of her school days in her transcript interview as well. She graduated from the Peters Township High School in 1940, and that image on the left shows the whole class of 1940 gals from bar. Irma is circled in red in the bottom. This was a high school that was opened in 1930. It was on the property across the street from the library, formerly the middle school, now occupied by the intermediate unit. If you want to learn what it was like growing up in Peters Township, school life, what kids did for fun, this is the transcript to read. After a brief career as an office worker with Bell Telephone and RCA in Mechanicsburg, she married Chester Brendo in 1949, and they lived on the property on Just About Road, farming and raising chickens, about 1,500 laying hens. She supplied many of the local restaurants with fresh eggs. At the time of the interview in 2003, many others were working on turning the Venetia Elementary School, pictured on the bottom right, into a senior community center. And many of you remember Mrs. Grego. You can see her photo on the top right there, from her senior perspective videos, where she interviewed local people in the township. These videos are still available on Peters Township Community TV YouTube channel, and they're still worth watching after all these years. Next slide.
Joseph Hardy III. My mind is active. I get up usually at 5 in the morning. My perfect day was to leave at 6 in the morning, cover 8 states in one of our jets, and go to bed at 2:30 in the morning. From his own words. Next slide, please. Joe Hardy visited the library in December of 2003. He visited the library as part of his participation in the library's oral history project. At that time, he met with our library staff and members of the Senator John Heinz Pittsburgh history staff. He was born in Pittsburgh in 1923 and graduated from Mount Lebanon High School. He is a true American success story, rising from a college student selling homegrown vegetables door to door to becoming the founder and CEO of what is today the largest privately owned building materials supplier to the professional contractor. In 1955, he opened Green Hills Lumber, beginning a lumber odyssey that continues today. He also opened a lumber store on Route 19 in Peters Township that was called Dan's Lumber, and it didn't have a siding on the building. In Joe Hardy's words, it was a little experimental, a little dinky thing compared to the standard. The Peters Township Magnus Building Solutions opened in 1999 in the former Dan's Lumber Building showroom, which incorporated custom home products sold in select 84 stores. In 1957, he purchased Nemacolin Woodlands Resort, one of North America's premier resort destinations. He purchased this former hunting lodge at a bankruptcy sale. Another quotation from Joe Hardy. And then, one of the greatest things this country did was have the GI Bill loans. Oh, I think that paid off for this country because you could go back to school and get your degree. Next slide, please.
You know, remember Dave Harmon. If you live in Peters Township, you may live in one of the homes he built. In his words, it's really hard to believe it to see the whole area that way. The sizes and the styles. They're all bigger. People want more things in the house than ever before. That was in 2003. Dave Harmon was born in nearby Upper St. Clair in 1932. Dave's father was in the construction business, building homes in the area. Dave began helping him as a teenager right after World War II. His family moved to Peters Township in the 1950s once his father bought some property to develop called the Orchard Highlands later. He recalled the area was still very rural at that time, with young people riding horses on the roads. His father established E. Harmon and Sons, and Mr. Cushy began his career as a builder with them. He married Mary Ann Seidel, and they have a son and daughter together. Dave Harmon stated that the development of sewers was a driving factor in the development of homes in Peters Township. According to Dave, from the perspective of a builder, putting in sewers, that was the best thing they ever did. Next slide. Together, Dave and his father built homes in Orchard Highlands, Colony Manor, and Meadow Creek. In 1962, Dave built the Peters Creek United Presbyterian Church on Brookwood Road, where he was a member. You can see the photo there. Dave reported the commissioners did most of the road work during the time he and his fathers built homes in the township. In 1973, Peters Township adopted a home rule government with 7 elected council members who were appointed township manager.
Charles Hodenshaw. Route 19 was the main corridor. There were really quite a few truck stops and all-night restaurants along Route 19 in Peters Township. Carrie?
Well, this quote reminds me that Margaret and I just recently did a Stories from the Archives video all about Route 19. So that's available if you want to watch that on the library YouTube channel.
When Carrie and I started planning for our Route 19 program, we did not understand why Peters Township had so many all-night restaurants and truck stops along Peters Township through McMurray. And so we learned from reading the transcripts. It was the highway to the south, because 79 wasn't built at that time. So Charles Hodenshield was born March 30th, 1938 in Pittsburgh, and he moved to Peters Township at the age of 1. He also is a Peters Township High School graduate. Charles and his wife, Mary Lou, raised their family in Peters Township. Next slide. He grew up in the village of McMurray, residing on 80 acres of farmland that was previously part of the historic estate of Herbie McMurray and his son, James McMurray. The Hodenshield property included the farmhouse, barn, and the spring house that was all part of that McMurray estate. During his younger days, Charles recalled exploring the old McMurray flour mill. In his transcript, he tells stories about the McMurray Telephone Company operating with telephone operators and switchboards. At that time, and with the party line, you could engage in a 1950s version of a conference call, connecting friends in the neighborhood. He recalled the Montour Railroad coming up through the community, hauling coal and stopping at the McMurray Supply Company, delivering feed and building materials. He describes the train from the perspective of a young child. That engine would stop right in McMurray, and you had a chance to get a good close look at this huge thing that was coming right into the community. Image on the left of the Peters Township Farm Fair. The Farm Fair drew the community together. There was something for everyone, and every township organization contributed to the fair. The Farm Fair began in the 1940s and was held annually in the middle of August to avoid conflict with the Washington County Fair. In the 1950s, the Pittsburgh newspapers started running stories about the Peters Township Farm Fair, resulting in the fair drawing tremendous crowds. The photo on the bottom right shows a 4-H display of products, and left to right, Joseph McMurray, Bob Chambers, and Chris Hodenshield, who was Charles's father. Charles Hodenshield was a member of the Peters Township Volunteer Fire Department for 33 years. And incidentally, that farm fair was held initially across the street where Carrie talked about the McMurray School, the middle school, now the Intermediate Union, and in later years, many of the activities moved over to this side of the street. Next slide, please. Jean McMurray Hutchinson. Such little traffic on McMurray Road. There were no cars coming down on it because we could sled right down from what was the high school to the dairy bar. Jean McMurray Hutchinson was born in 1927 in Peters Township, where she has resided for all but 10 years. Jean resided on 2 properties that are included in Caldwell's 1876 Illustrated Atlas of Washington County, and we do have that atlas on the 2nd floor. She graduated with the Peters Township High School class of 1946. Next slide, please. There's Jean's iconic photograph of the Montour Railroad passing through McMurray on what is today the Arrowhead Trail. It is the most sought-after image in our archives. Here.
I just wanted to explain to people what you're looking at maybe on this photo. This is Thomas Road. Here's McMurray Road, and the train is actually coming down through this narrow trail. So when you're walking on the trail, you can appreciate that that used to be an old railroad.
Okay, next slide, please. Jean McMurray Hutchinson is the heart of the Peters Township Public Library archives. She was an early donor of historical photographs, including glass slides documenting the early McMurray Town Center. On the left, you'll see the McMurray Cooperative Creamery. The creamery operated for about 15 or 20 years, beginning in 1895, and it was very close to the Montour Railroad tracks. Again, right down here at the intersection of McMurray and Valley Road. On the right, along with the Matthews collection, the Hutchinson family donated materials that provide a wealth of information about the Boy Scout cabin that was dedicated in 1935. Sadly, this landmark Boy Scout cabin burnt down either in the late 1960s or early 1970s, possibly by an arsonist. Hutchinson's materials include the dedication program, articles about the Boy Scout cabin, names of contributors who built the cabin, names of the Scouts, and photographs including the interior of that Boy Scout cabin. Next slide, please.
Now let's remember Dr. Howard Jack. In his words, I reminded myself, move slowly, find out what it is you have to work with. Find out about the people who are here. Find out what the community needs and what will support, and then gradually get the machine in gear. Normally, I think it's not to move too fast as an incoming administrator. First, you have to find out who is doing what, why, where, and when. Howard Jack was born in 1923 in West Mifflin, and he grew up in Bethel Park. He enrolled at Washington and Jefferson College, left to serve in World War II, then returned home after service in the Army to complete his education at college, later achieving a master's and a doctorate at the University of Pittsburgh. He began his career as a teacher, later transitioning to administration, and eventually moved to Peters Township in 1965 to become the superintendent of schools. It was during this time that people were learning Peters Township was a great place to live. The township population in the 1950s of 3,000 more than doubled to 7,000 by 1960. So in 10 years, population more than doubled. Dr. Jack held the position of superintendent until 1983 when he retired. His interview shares his knowledge about the development of the school system in Peters Township from the early 1900s. He discusses the many changes in the school facilities since that time and the changes in the educational philosophy that occurred during his tenure as superintendent. Dr. Jack worked closely with Reed Day, who I just learned was the student for this, school district solicitor, during the construction of the high school and the problems created by the bankruptcy of the Brandon Construction Company that Margaret mentioned earlier in this presentation. He guided the district through the 1966-67 gas crisis. He closed the middle school and placed the high school building on double shifts. The high school students that headed classes in the morning, leaving the afternoons class for the middle school students. In these photos, next slide, you can see Dr. Jack on the left with the students at the high school at the construction site, and on the right is a photo of the high school under construction in the summer of 1967. Dr. Jack was an outstanding fundraiser for the library, as Mrs. Lee can attest, leading an effort to raise funds for the new library furniture and bringing in more than $400,000. After retiring in 1983, he served as a volunteer with many community organizations like the Washington County Community Foundation and the United Way of Washington County. Next slide.
Elma Betty Johnston. We had other philanthropic projects, but the library was the main one. We were all willing to work for the library. Carrie, I think it might be a nice time to say we've created history here today with Mrs. Lee here, Mara Lennick here, and Lacey Love here. I think that just a round of applause. We have 3 library directors in this birthday. Carrie and I would talk about this. We would say, wouldn't it be great if we had all library directors here today? And so that kind of turned out, and it kind of just makes it a very, very special day. So returning to, and it's just so appropriate, because Betty Johnston was kind of about the library. Betty Johnston was born October 29, 1918, and married Thomas Johnson in 1940. They moved to Peters Township in 1959. Betty Johnston's transcript includes a timeline of the history of the Women's Club of Peters Township, which she joined in 1959. According to this timeline, in 1921, 18 members of the Society of Farm Women formed a junior section of the Farm Women, which later became the Women's Club of Peters Township. In 1952, the club officially changed its name to the Women's Club of Peters Township. In January 1956, the Women's Club of Peters Township adopted a recommendation from the executive board that they undertake to establish a community library. From 1956 until the Women's Club disbanded in 1996, the Peters Township Library remained the main project for the Women's Club of Peters Township. Next slide. Betty Johnston served as president of the Women's Club in 1968, 1969. The photo on the right shows the program from the 50th anniversary, which was held in 1971 for the Women's Club. The slide on the left, Betty Johnston performed in the music division of the Women's Club in the chorale under the direction of Henrietta Laughlin, who I believe was a teacher at Peters Township High School at that time. Next slide, please.
Now let's remember Martha Miller Lattimore. In her words, and at that time, there was anywhere from 1 to 15 families on a line. If you had lots of money, you had a private line, which was very, very few. Most of the lines were anywhere from 12 to 15 on the line. Martha Miller was born in March 1918 in Peters Township, where she lived her entire life. She attended the Pleasant Valley School and graduated from Peters Township High School in 1936. Next slide. In her interview, she tells the stories from 1924 of how students, if they were good, would walk down from Pleasant Valley School, pictured here on the right, to the little store that Walter Butch Donaldson operated at the crossroads in Penn. Can you imagine that happening now? After her first job at the Clark and Woolworths in Canonsburg, she became a telephone operator for McMurray Telephone Agency from 1938 to 1959. Martha worked as a switchboard operator, eventually serving as the chief operator in the 1940s. Her interview explains how telephone service operated in those years of crank phones, no dials, and phone lines shared by up to 15 families. In 1946, she married John Lattimore, who also worked for the telephone company. She later worked in the Venetia Elementary School cafeteria from 1967 to 1981. Mrs. Lattimore was an early member of the Peters Township Range and a member of the Center Presbyterian Church for 71 years. Mrs. Lattimore and her son John joined us here. Have donated a large collection of photographs and other materials documenting the history of McMurray Telephone Company, from the eventual sale to Bell Telephone Company. You can see some of their donations, including Mrs. Lattimore's headset as a phone operator, on display in the second floor. Next slide.
Edward Library. The Pittsburgh-Washington Wheeling bus service is pretty extensive. You could go places on the bus you couldn't go in a streetcar. You could go from Donaldson's Crossroads over here to McMurray. It was pretty useful. I rode it a lot. Ed was born in Pittsburgh and he moved to Peters Township in 1941. He graduated from Peters Township High School in 1963. He worked in the hearing aid business and later volunteered at the Trolley Museum as well as our library. Ed is married to Janice Librarian and they currently reside in the eastern part of the state. Both Ed's father and mother volunteered their time and their talent in this community. Ed's father served as president of the Lions Club in 1956 and was very active in the Lions Project to publish the first community map of Peters Township. And Ed stated that map publication went hand in hand with the new zoning enacted in Peters Township around that same time. Alberta Librarian, along with Barbara Miner, spearheaded the effort in 1957 to bring a community library to Peters Township. They were members of the Women's Club of Peters Township that adopted that recommendation to establish this community library. Alberta Librarian was involved with the Peters Township Public Library for 25 years, where she was a long-time library board member. Next slide. On the left. In the 1920s, Ed's grandfather, E.A. Myers, established a hearing aid company to solve his own hearing problem. Ed's father, Samuel Librarian, joined the company while a student at Carnegie Tech, later becoming president of Radio Ear. The business opened a new Radio Ear building on Valley Brook Road in 1956. The company chose Peters Township because of its desirable location and available space. The company operated in a 22,000 square foot building, employing 120 persons at its peak. Many Peters Township residents were employed in the assembly department or in the offices. The image on the top right shows Ed Librarian with a trolley on the last day of operation, August 29, 1953, and you recall that was one of the oil paintings that Robert Chamberlain painted. Farm fair, lower right. We love that farm fair. We actually hosted a couple programs, 18-some years ago in the farm fair, and then more recently a virtual program on the farm fair. We know that summer is almost over when we meet at the Peters Township Farm Fair. This statement was expressed in the 1957 Peters Township Farm Fair program. Prior to moving out of the area, Ed Librarian donated his family's extensive collection of historical photographs and other materials to the Peters Township Public Library archives. Next slide.
Now let's remember Robert Matthews. I can remember when I went to apply for a job, they weren't going to hire me because they said, you're far out. I says, well, we have better transportation in rush hours than you do in Pittsburgh. Robert Matthews was born in May 1921 in Peters Township, the son of Harvey and Elizabeth Roden Matthews. He grew up with his parents and brother and sisters on the dairy farm, located owned by his grandfather, Chatham Glenn Matthews. The farm was located on Valley Brook Road at the current location of the St. Benedict Abbot Church. Robert married Marie Hoffman in 1943, and they lived most of their life in Peters Township in a home they built on the original family farm. He graduated from Peters Township High School in 1939, and both of his parents taught in the school district. His father retired as a principal at the Venetia Elementary School. His mother, Elizabeth, taught at the Wright one-room schoolhouse at the end of Turkey Foot one-room school. Robert Matthews began his military service in the Army February 3rd, 1942. He received the Silver Star for his extensive combat heroics. His story is documented on the Wall of Valor of the VFW Post 764, McMurray, PA. Robert Matthews was elected to the Hall of Valor at the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall in Pittsburgh.
Next slide. Pictured in this photograph, the Matthews family farmhouse, left to right. Jane McMurray Matthews, Chatham Glenn Matthews, and their daughter, Martha Mabel Matthews. This property has been in the Matthews family since the late 1700s. In addition to working on his 100-acre farm, Chatham Glenn Matthews also operated the C.G. Matthews Cash Grocer located in Beltsuber, Allegheny County during the years 1891 to 1894. Chatham Glenn Matthews. Next slide. Chatham Glenn Matthews kept a 108-page journal that was donated by the Robert Matthews family. The library selected this historical and fragile journal for digitization by the library through a historical archival records care grant received from the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. To do this work, Peters Township Library matched the grant funding for a total amount of $6,900 for our library digitization project. In the left is the Matthews family members visiting our library to take a look at that priceless journal. And the photo on the right is Carolyn Frederick, our archivist, and she's actually at the digitization station. You can see the camera, the stand, the lights. And with her are the great-granddaughters of Chatham Glenn Matthews that were able to come to the library and participate in that. And I want to recognize Carolyn. She's with us, so if you'll just turn right around. That is Carolyn Frederick, who works here as a consulting archivist. She's a full-time archivist at the University of Pittsburgh, and she spends her Saturdays in our library to work on our archives. Next slide, please. So on the right, you can take a look. Part of the grant, we selected six fragile items about the early history of Peters Township. The requirements for this grant included the purchase of a camera, lighting, stand, and other equipment and supplies to create our digitization station. We also purchased archival boxes for storage of these fragile materials. We scanned the 6 selected records, and we are now providing access to the public for each one of these scanned items. Carolyn Frederick supervised all this work, and it also involved library staff and volunteers. Following our presentation, Carolyn will have a display table up here, and she will show you how to access the oral history transcripts and how to access these documents and other photographs that we have on the PA photos and documents. Also, we are working with Carolyn as we transition from our local history room to the Peters Township Library archives. Under her direction, we are following archival guidelines for accepting donations, organizing collections, creating finding aids, digitizing selected items, and most important, providing access to these historical resources to you. Don't have to be in the library, you can be anywhere, and she can show you how to access those. So by sharing this information with you, you can see that any items that you donate to the PTPO archives receive the very best professional care. Next slide.
And now I'd like to recognize our Master of Ceremonies, past interviewee, Tom McMurray. In Tom's words, back in the early 60s was when it really started building up here as the closest to Allegheny County in Pittsburgh. And the roads were becoming better, taxes were lower, there were half-acre lots, there was a lot of attraction in Peters. And so now we honor our Masters of Ceremony today, Tom McMurray. Tom was born in March 1951 and has been a lifelong resident of Peters Township. He, like Jean McMurray Hutchinson, is a descendant of the McMurray family who settled in the village of McMurray and for whom McMurray is named. You may recall Tom has made several guest appearances during our Stories of the Archive videos. He attended Peters Township High School, graduating in 1968. He attended Davis and Elkins College and became a certified public accountant. He and his wife Sandy have 3 children. Next slide. Tom's great-grandfather was James Harvey McMurray, who lived on Thomas Road and was the first president of the Peters Township School Board. His father, Robert McMurray, was also a school board member for 24 years, ending in 1981. His mother was a teacher in the school district, and Tom has served on the Peters Township School Board since 1983, 40 years in total. You can see Tom circled in red in this 1987 photo of the school board. Starting in the mid-60s, coffee houses were becoming big in the area, with rock and roll becoming popular. Tom and his friends formed a band called Clementine Paddleford's Memorial Public Band, and often they competed in the Battle of Bands contests. They were all seniors from Peters Township, and their class song was Sunshine of Your Love. You can see them in the photo at the top right in 1968, and then in June 2018 when they performed for their 50th high school reunion. Since 1986, Tom has been the director of Peters Township Ambulance Service, sponsored by the VFW Code 764 in New York. Tom has been a trustee of the Peters Creek United Presbyterian Church and an auditor and treasurer of the Brushfront Cemetery Board. So Tom, I just wanted to remind you we're planning another Stories of the Archives video for later this year, and the topic is something you might be familiar with, the Peters Township Schools. Next slide.
Is that a yes, Tom? That's a yes. We're all set for this good debate. William Northrop. I'd rather have growth community problems than the no-growth community problems that we see in the city of Pittsburgh now. I mean, it's a city shrinking. William Northrop was born in 1959 in Washington, PA. He married Elizabeth Northrop in 1984. For over 200 years, the Northrop family lived in Washington County, PA. Bill Northrop and his family moved to Peters Township in 1988. In 1902, John Stewart, the great-grandfather of Bill Northrop, began purchasing shares in the Observer-Reporter. And by 1912-1913, he owned all the paper both the Washington Observer and the Washington Reporter. On April 17, 2000, the Northrop brothers, publishers of the Observer Reporter, handed over the company to their children, including Bill and his cousin Tom Northrop. The newspaper covered Peters Township for over a long period, from its beginnings as a rural and mining community to the suburban Peters Township. The changes occurring during the 50s and 60s were dramatic as the community of farmland became filled with new homes, infrastructure, and commercial development on its way to becoming the largest community in Washington County. In Bill's words, I think we've been very pro-development because I think we see firsthand in Washington, PA, what life is like in a no-growth community. Next slide. Looking back, John Opeka. We need a subdivision control ordinance to control the builders or anyone who wants to build in Peters Township so that the supervisors have control of putting in streets at that particular time or whatever, according to the way it should be done. John Opeka was born in Oakdale in 1918. He was married to Lillian Opeka, and he moved to Peters Township in 1948, and he started his own business, Opeka Auto Repair, out of his two-car garage. Next slide. John Opeka moved his business to Valley Brook Road in 1963, where they had been repairing vehicles since that time. On the left, you see John Opeka and his son, who's with us here today. They had been repairing vehicles ever since that time he opened the business at that site. John was an active member in many organizations in Peters Township, including the Rotary and the Chamber of Commerce. He was one of 18 persons who reestablished the Peters Township Chamber of Commerce in 1953, pulling the chamber out of bankruptcy. John served as president of the Chamber of Commerce in 1967. The image on the right is of the 1967 Peters Township Chamber of Commerce directory. Opeka's concern over the development of Peters Township led him to encourage the Township Board of Supervisors to implement a subdivision control ordinance similar to other communities such as Upper St. Clair. Behind the scenes, he worked tirelessly for improvements at the high school to improve the opportunity of Peters Township High School graduates to gain admittance to their preferred colleges and universities. In January 1960, Peters Township High School received its accreditation from the Middle States Association of Colleges and Secondary Schools, a significant achievement in the history of the Peters Township schools. John Opeka served in the Army Air Force as a navigator and flew in 50 combat missions, attaining the rank of captain. For his service, he was awarded the Air Medal with 6 Oak Leaf Custers and the Distinguished Flying Cross in the Mediterranean Theater of Operations. He, too, is a member of the Wall of Valor of our local McMurray VFW. Next slide.
Remembering Boyd Caldwell Roach Jr. In his words, and this great-great-great-grandfather was involved in the Whiskey Rebellion. Our family history read that twice he stopped Richard Holcroft from burning the house before Holcroft burned down Neville's house. Boyd Caldwell Roach was born in June 1927 in McMurray, where he lived all of his life. He was known by everyone who knew him as the Peters Township historian. Boyd Roach's great-great-grandfather, William Caldwell, lived in Peters Township during the late 1700s. He was one of the original settlers. In 1952, Boyd Roach's mother, Mary, wrote Written History of Peters Township. And this was copied and updated by Boyd Caldwell Roach again in January 1991 and August 1991. Mary Roach taught in Peters Township schools. Boyd graduated from Peters Township High School in 1945. And during his 4 years of high school, the male teachers were gone already in the World War II conflict. During his senior year, students turns visiting the recruiting office at age 17 when you were able to enlist. According to Boyd Caldwell Roach, it's surprising how many of those that were killed lived in Peters Township. I think there were 11. That was close to the end. Next slide. Boyd Roach donated photographs, documents, and memorabilia documenting his life in the village of Thompsonville. The photo on the left is of the Thompsonville School for grades 1 to 6, where Mr. Roach attended. His transcript details the daily life in a one-room school. You may recognize this schoolhouse currently as the Argentina restaurant on Camp Lane in McMurray. On the right is a photo of the Thompsonville trestle. You're looking at the trestle from east to west as it travels along Route 19 and over the top of Valley Brook Road, the ramp that intersects Route 19. So I wanted to point that out to make sure you understand what you're looking at. So this is the current ramp going up Valley Brook Road. Here's Route 19, and this is how far above the trestle, the trolley trestle traveled along parallel to Route 19.
And take a good look at that trestle, because the next slide about Tina Wagner talks about that also. Sorry, Carrie.
Next slide. Here you're looking at the covers of Rachel A. Bell's diaries from the Roach family papers. Bell was born in Peters Township in 1844. The diaries were written in 1889 to 1890 and 1892 to 94. During her years as a caretaker, provided insight into her years living on a farm as a middle-aged unmarried woman. Rachel Ann Bell was the second cousin once removed of Boyd Caldwell Roach. These fragile historical handwritten journals were recently digitized as part of the art grant that Margaret discussed earlier. They are available for viewing at PA Photos and Documents. You can watch a demonstration by Carolyn Frederick after Margaret and I conclude our portion of the program. Next slide.
Doris Tracks. Things started dying in Pittsburgh, and produce wasn't selling like it should be. So maybe more was coming in from out of state. They decided to turn the barn into a market. It was in 1956 that they opened up the market. Doris Leach Tracks was born February 23, 1930 in Carrie, Pennsylvania. She married Robert Tracks in 1950, and he served as president of the Tracks Farms, as well as the president of the Pennsylvania Growers Association. Next slide. Doris and Robert Tracks built their home in Peters Township in 1966. The photo on the left shows them celebrating Robert's 50th year of working in farming, and that photo was taken in 1997. In 1947, the Tracks family purchased the Stoup farm, and in 1948, they bought the adjoining 100-acre Mesta farm. Later, they bought part of the Lighthouser farm, Phillips farm, and leased part of the Zimmerman and Rooney farms. In 1956, the Tracks family started the farm market, which is one of the first attempts at a farmer's market in Peters Township. In 1979, the Tracks family doubled the sales area with a new addition, and then added another addition in 1986. The business continued to expand, and in 2000, Tracks Farm held an open house to celebrate a third edition. In recent years, the Tracks family embraced the agritainment field, including hay rides, you pick crops, and other activities. Trax Farm received Conservation Farmer of the Year Award from the Washington County Conservation District in 1985. In 2002, Doris Trax wrote about the history of the Trax family and their farm, the Trax Farm's Pictorial History. Mrs. Trax donated a print copy and a CD edition of her publication to the Peters Township Public Library archives. Next slide. Tina Wagner. We had a contest for people to send in a person's name that they thought was the kindest. Tina Wagner was the definition of kindness. She was born in 1923 and moved to Peters Township at the age of 2 years. She married George Wagner in 1941. Tina began school at the Thompsonville School, a one-room school. Her transcript details a typical school day under their beloved teacher, Laura Horner. Tina Wagner and the neighborhood children walked to school until bus service began her 3rd or 4th grade year. And I believe her home was out almost as far as Finehouse Funeral Home, is where she lived, and they walked to school. This included walks on the Thompsonville Trestle. We saw how precarious that walk would be by that photo we just showed you of the Thompsonville Trestle. Next slide. Tina Wagner was a 1941 Peters Township High School graduate. In later years, she served as president of the PTA and eventually president of the Council of PTA Presidents. She was also appointed as assistant director of adult education programs, which included classes such as golf, woodworking, sewing, power equipment, foreign languages, and other. Many of these courses today are offered by the community colleges. In this photograph, Mrs. Wagner is seen with Dr. Howard Jack at the groundbreaking ceremony for the new Peters Township High School, 1966. Tina participated in community organizations, which included the Civic Club, Century Club, and the McMurray Art League. In the late 1940s, the Civic Club developed a kindness month, and Tina was so delighted that kindness is currently being promoted at Peters Township High School. I just wanted to say special things about 3 other persons that were involved with this oral history project, and one who was involved in capacity donor. Carrie Weaver took all those photographs at the time those interviewees came to our library. Those same photographs she created to display in the back of the room. When we end, which is shortly, you will get to enjoy the delicious homemade cookies, brownies, and so on that Carrie Weaver baked right up until last night for this program. Not believing she would get that all done, I went out and purchased some for the Bethlehem Bakery. However, she did. She brought them in, I think, as soon as the library opened. Next, Patricia Donaldson Stutzman, who is right in front of me. When we had our celebration, when we celebrated, when we presented these oral history transcripts to the public, we also had a program not as large as this because we held it in that room. Patricia baked, I believe, 12,000 dozen of homemade cookies. So Carrie was not going to come in with anything but the homemade cookies. Bill Jones. Bill Jones is right up here in front too today. Bill Jones came and he escorted every one of those interviewees into that room where they told their stories. And along with Peter, you have to remember, it was Peters Township that was paying the library, that was paying for these transcripts. They were to be about Peters Township, not their own personal history. So Bill comes out one day, he says, this has to stop. Barry Alfonso, the interviewer, was getting carried away with some of their personal anecdotes, and we had to be very diplomatic and remind him who was paying the check. So we see him with his cane today. This isn't the first time. He would have to take that back with him to each interview so he could keep Barry in line. Barry sends his greetings. He wanted to be here today to join you, but he had a family obligation that he couldn't refuse. So again, next slide.
That concludes our presentation to honor and remember the 21 participants of our Life in Peters Township Oral History Project 20-year anniversary. We hope you can stay and visit our displays up on the second floor. Watch a few minutes of one of our stories of the archives programs about the dairy bar and the reading room in the second floor. You can visit Carol and Frederick, who will be up here showing you how to access all these tremendous resources on PA photos and documents. You can visit Kathleen at the Peters Township Library Foundation table to purchase Peters Township note cards, Peters Township heritage books, and more. And Kathleen's back here near the refreshments. I hope you're going to enjoy my cookies that I made. And Margaret, I think you have an important announcement too.
Yes, I do. Coming soon. Next slide, please. 3 newspapers: the Commerce News, Peters Township News, and the News Progress are all in the process of being digitized, and they will be available for you to read and to search on PA photos and documents. We just got them back from the vendor, Creekside Digital, that took care of digitizing them. We're now working with PA photos and documents, whether we'll be putting them up as JPEGs or PDF files, and that's where we are now. So those newspaper issues were donated by Kathy Krebs Levitt, and for the News Progress, we had to actually have a search, and thank you to the Library Foundation, because we had to pay for a search from Library of Congress to determine if there was a copyright. That wasn't as important with the Commerce News and Peters Township News, because Peters Township Chamber of Commerce authorized us to take possession and ownership so that we could distribute, to make those available to the public. And again, this is another one of those projects that had a bit of a price to it. So we had a generous donation from one of our patrons, and the rest of it was picked up by our Peters Township Library Foundation with some from our library. So that probably within the next 2-3 months we'll be able to see those. I do hope you'll have time to enjoy the refreshments. Talk with Carolyn, who's going to bring her table as soon as Carrie and I vacate this area. And also make your way upstairs, because our other staff members, Stephanie Schultz and Jamie Mack, put a lot of effort into creating those slides. It's been our privilege and our honor that Carrie share today with you. And thank you so much for making this a special day.
One more thing I want to remind everybody, Anthony's going to be entertaining us from the balcony on the second floor. So we're going to hear some more of Anthony's crooning as we enjoy our refreshments. And so enjoy visiting everybody. I know people haven't seen each other in ages, so make a binge. Relax, have some refreshments, get up and go to the second floor. Thank you.